Yeah, that was 2001. One of Paul's jobs was to patrol Voyageurs National Park. He had recently completed his workday. Seated on a dock by one of the lakes, he was enjoying himself while spending time with a colleague. A long, piercing howl erupted from the woods as they stood under the stars on a balmy summer night, conversing about nothing in particular. It wasn't a gray wolf, as Paul knows from experience. Whatever this was, it seemed to have enormous, distorted lungs because of how powerful it was. None of this had ever been heard by him before. Not only was it extraordinarily loud, but it lasted for about 18 seconds. The sound seemed to originate from the salt in the forest, so they set out to locate the origin. Having abandoned the trailer they had been staying in, they sprinted back to it. With a pistol and 2 flashlights in hand, they staked out a path through the forest, determined to find the source of the last sound. The darkness was relentless. Luckily, they were armed with flashlights. In the shadowy woodland, they listened as they make their way. It was completely silent until all of a sudden it started up again. Both of them exchanged glances. It resounded after they waited less than a minute. Now it seemed to be shifting eastward, but they could still not detect its approach. After deciding they had to capture this on tape, they dashed back to the trailer for the recording gear and set out into the woods once more. They ventured out into the forest on foot. Nothing can be seen. This recording apparatus was at their disposal. They came across a log. They placed the apparatus on the log, activated it, and then waited. They perceived motion in the distance within the forest, and then they heard the same howl. This scream was recorded. Being in the heart of the forest, they could feel the fear seeping into their bodies. They are startled by this howl in the middle of the night. However, they were aware that they had to take all necessary steps to document this. That was left on. They perceived it once more, but this time it sounded as though it were in motion. It swung from side to side. They listened to it 3 more times. With each iteration, there was a little shift relative to the previous one. Recording the 4th howl was enough for them. They were eager to leave. They made it back to the camper through the forest, eager to share their findings. They began by listening as they activated the apparatus. In the distance, they could make out a sound. Here is what they discovered after the audio was enhanced. A low growl, which gradually rose in pitch before changing, could be heard by them. They could feel it drawing nearer and nearer. Almost immediately after the first howl died down, they perceived a second, seemingly in response, howl coming from across the lake. Both entities were exchanging messages. In the recording, not even that could be made out. It was audible to them. The howl could be heard in 3 directions, to the north, to the south, and to the east. Plus, they were familiar with the terrain and the locations of the lakes, so it was obvious that it had to be across this specific lake. They were so enthralled by it that they decided to share it on the Voyageurs National Park website and discuss it on the radio after listening to it multiple times. Their supervisor walked in and wanted to know what they were up to while they were putting this together for the website. In addition to informing the supervisor of their findings, Paul also played back the recording for him. The entire operation was halted by the supervisor. Never before, according to Paul, had he seen him so serious or furious as he was that day. He threatened that the Park Service might fire you if you brought up the subject again. Someone might fire you. Without delay, they removed this file from the server. They were ordered by the supervisor to turn over the recording file. Now that he had it, they have no idea what he did with it. While they were employees there, they dropped the subject completely. Just Paul and his colleague. Paul has been plagued by this for more than 22 years. He has attempted to erase it from his memory, but he is aware that something is still present, a large and potentially harmful object. On the other hand, Paul found this to be quite intriguing. Because of his job as a park ranger, he is usually able to identify forest sounds. This was not a wolf, bear, or moose. He is familiar with the sounds of these animals, but something huge and powerful stood out. It was also unusual and unnatural, at least as far as we are aware. He expressed his desire to no longer be alone with this in his email. He yearned to be acknowledged and understood by those who would give him the attention he deserved. However, he is aware that the Park Service would blacklist him if he revealed his true identity. his full name. To avoid losing his job, he was very careful to use only his first name when giving out information. In the 1980s, while I was a college student, I worked for the concessionaires in Yellowstone. I actually had a friend who was employed by the Park Service. Actually, on a particular weekend, we spent the night and the entire weekend at a fire lookout in the Yellowstone backcountry. The experience was truly enjoyable. We were far above the cloud, which came in at a very low level. I was blown away. To that end, he might have anecdotes pertaining to such matters. I am uncertain. It's intriguing that we got a story about this, but I've lost touch with him. I think that wraps up Paul's account of our time at Voyageurs National Park. So I appreciate you all tuning in.